Oh, good morning. Happy to see you all. You looked all dressed up fancy. I got new shoes from the Goodwill on Friday, so I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really good. In a third week of a series, it just means we're talking through some kind of topic through scriptures on really wrestling with belief, and we'll get to that in just a second. But before we do, I just want you to think about today a little bit and why you're here. Like what did you celebrate? Right? You're all dressed up. Got fun stuff going on. I'll tell you why I'm here. What I'm celebrating. I'm here because, I'm a professional Christian. You guys pay me to be here, which is really nice of you. But the reason I'm really celebrating is, you may not know this, my salary is actually determined each week by the number of people here. So I basically get $20 per person. So, that'll be a good payday for me. Taking mama out to eat, going to a Brazilian steakhouse after all this. That's not a joke. We really are going to a Brazilian steakhouse, but I don't earn more if more people here. That it has to do with your giving. I get a percentage of that, That was a joke. Okay? That's so uncomfortable. So, but really, I want you to think about this. Like, what are you celebrating? Like, we say things like, watch this. You want to see a super magic trick here? Nobody's prepped. Let me show you what's about to happen. I'm about to get everybody to say a certain thing. You ready for this? Ready, church? He is risen. You see that? It's like that. It's just like one of those neat things we do on Easter where someone says he's risen, and then you say he is risen indeed, which is kind of interesting because no one really talks that way. Like, you don't go, I like spaghetti, and then someone else goes, I like spaghetti indeed, but I guess it makes sense for Easter. But this whole idea, we're singing songs, Easter baskets, we dress up fancy, you get new dresses and all that kind of stuff. And it just makes sense if we're going to do all that. We at least pause for a second and try to figure out why we're doing it, right? I think so much of our world and what we do, we just kind of react and just kind of jump in whatever the current is and do whatever everybody else is doing. And that mob rule thing, it can be good sometimes if everybody's doing stuff we agree with, but it's real bad when the tide changes. And so we should be smart enough and at least pause long enough to kind of think about Easter and what it is we're here to do and what it is we're trying to consider. And I know there's all sorts of different categories of people here. You're here because your parents wanted you to be, your grandparents or your children wanted you to be, or just kind of your routine. No shame and all that. Really, really glad you're here for whatever reason that is, and feel honored to be able to preach at you for the next hour and a half or so. So, really thankful for that. That's a joke as well. Goodness, okay. There's going to be a lot of sarcasm coming out of my mouth, so we're going to keep practicing. But as we do think about it, we got to go, okay, well, we're kind of here. In fact, the reason we worship on Sundays now instead of Saturdays, if you think about Jewish custom, it said, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. And that's been a confusing thing for us because the Sabbath is actually the end of the week, which is a Saturday, but we now go to church on a Sunday, and this isn't the Sabbath, so why do we do that? And all of it kind of originates with this moment in history 2,000 years ago where on the first day of the week, when folks entered into a tomb to go take care of Jesus' body, they found him not there because he wasn't there. Because he had risen, as the scriptures say. He is not here, for he has risen indeed, is what the angel said there. And so we have this moment where everything changes, and now 2,000 years later, we're still worshiping on Sundays, and people get dressed up once a year, do this thing, and it's fun, and then you have a picnic, and hope for good weather, all that kind of stuff. But I just want to kind of, I don't know, if you're a Christian, or maybe even if you're not, let me help shape what we're talking about here and why we celebrate this, okay? Because it does get confusing. Like, even I talk to my kiddos, like this whole idea of really, like, God had to die. Couldn't he have fixed it some other way? Like, he's God. He really have to die on the cross. Like, and why does it matter that he came back to life? Oh, wait, if he comes back to life, that means all the stuff that he said was true, and so we can trust that he's God. Like, is the resurrection, the fact that the God of the universe in the form of Jesus brought himself back to life, was it just to affirm and give us proof that everything he said was true? So he says he's God, now we can believe him because he proved he's God, because it's the only time in human history where a dead person brought himself back to life. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And so there's the whole idea of the resurrection, that now that we see that, we can now look backwards and go, okay, these things must be true. Is that why he did it? And in some ways that's helpful, but that's not why he comes back to life. That's not why he dies. Like, he had to die, right? And what you've been told, if you've grown up in church, what I've told my kids, what I believe, and yet it gets really confusing, is scriptures say for the wages of sin, meaning the consequences of our behavior, our bad behavior, is death. Death, like, that's what we deserve. It's not very nice to talk about. And so God in his graciousness, he pays that penalty for us, but even that's still really confusing. And then we have these 3 days. He does that, and he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Shows his love. He says it's finished. All these really profound things. And then he dies. And then he comes back to life. And so what exactly is he showing us by coming back to life? And here's what I'd argue or offer. In any kind of warfare, okay, or battle, if you don't like the word war, that's fair as well. There's basically two teams, right? You got this, even a sports event, one of those ball games, there's two teams. There's always, in our opinion, the good team and the bad team. We're always on the good team. Makes perfect sense. That's why when I play basketball, I call it the score and I always say good guys, one score, bad guys, another score, knowing that the good guys are always the team that I'm on. Helps everybody understands when we're playing. That's the two teams. But in every game or every battle, there's two different sides, right? And when you have a battle or even a war or whatever it is, what you do in it, okay, this isn't biblical, this is just sociological, this is just how it works in our world, particularly wars or battles, is you want to, if you're battling someone else, battling another country, what you have to define is who you're battling. In other words, who is the enemy, right? Simple. And then once you define who the enemy is, so you found the enemy out there, you point, there's the enemy, then your next step in battle is to win. And the way that you win a battle is you just defeat your enemy, right? David and Goliath, big guy, small man, throws a rock. He kills him in the moment. He defeated the enemy and thus defeated all the Philistines in that moment, right? Any kind of thing. When you Eagles versus Patriots last year, the Patriots were the enemy, right? Tom Brady can't catch. Feels good, right? We're like 14 months removed, and you guys are still like, yeah. So, right? The enemy, you see who the enemy is, big bad Patriots, and then you defeat the enemy, and then you go climb up some poles. We'll show them. Let's go climb those poles now, all right? So you just defeat the enemy, right? And all those kind of things. And so whatever the war is, whatever the battle is, there's an enemy, and you just defeat the enemy. So if that's just kind of how wars and battles work, it makes sense that we'd stop for a second, which we don't do much, and ask who our enemy is. Like, what's really your enemy? It's not your spouse, not your kids, not your ex, but like, maybe we can look more like, I don't know, large scale, macro, not micro, but I would say, and this is reductionistic and won't fit in every category, but our enemy is death, right? Now we have other ones and we'll talk about them in just a second, but the reality is what's staring us down that we can't get away from is death, and it's already happening to our bodies, right? Like every day our bodies are feeling a little bit more death. I am 38 years old right now, and this year has been the worst year of my body. I just found out a few weeks ago that every part of my right leg or my ankles I have to have reconstructive surgery on. Just, they say I'm going to sit still for like 12 months or something like that. So I have it scheduled for 2032 is when I'm going to have that surgery, right? And so, but I'm just dealing with this, and if you don't have any body ailments, the other thing you would know is true is what you could eat as a 20-year-old or 15-year-old is different than what you can now eat. And I could put anything in my body and it did nothing, right? Now I don't know, I saw those muffins out in the lobby and I gained like 3 pounds just looking at them. So I used to I used to get those calipers, I'm talking about, to judge your body fat. You know what I'm saying? Now I just jump up and down when I get out of the shower and I'm going, nope, there's a lot of it. Got it, yep. I just start counting. Okay, it used to be 5 seconds of jiggling, now it's 7 seconds, It's just, so really, you got this reality of just death is just staring us down. You got Fountain of Youth, got all these different things where if there is a product that we can sell to you that make you look younger, feel younger, act younger, you want those things, right? Because we just know that it's just staring us down. So death is just taunting us. And it is facing all of us at some point. We don't like to talk about it, and you're going, yeah, see, there's a pastor, he's going to try to scare death and hell and all that stuff. That's not the agenda anyway. And some of you are like, I'm not afraid of death. In fact, if you think about it, for some people, death becomes a better option than life. Because their enemy isn't death, their enemy is hopelessness. And I think about all my enemies and the things that scare me. Death scares me less than abandonment does. Like the idea of losing my wife, or my kiddos, or growing old by myself. That's what scares me. Like, scares the death out of me, right? Literally. Some of you, so you got this fear of abandonment, and that is a real enemy in your life. Others, it's just, you're really, really afraid of being humiliated or shamed, right? And so you live your whole life trying not to do anything silly because you don't want to feel shame or be shamed or made fun of, right? And all this has to do with our family of origin stuff we're working through, and abandonment from my family, or dad's making fun of us, whatever those things are, right? But we have those, and they're real fears. They're real enemies. Others of us, one of them is just being misrepresented. Like the idea that someone would say something about you that's not true or portray you as someone that you're actually not just enrages you. Others, it's actually like physical pain. Like you are staring down physical pain every single day. And you do not see an end in sight. And every day, the minute you step up out of that bed, your spine and everything else is just killing you. And so some of us have seen people grow older and live in that constant pain. And so we got all these different enemies, and they're all really real. But remember, if you got an enemy, the way that you do battle is you define your enemy, then you defeat your enemy, right? Well, what's interesting is 2,000 years ago, Jesus, after declaring he is God, declaring, as John the Baptist said on his behalf, "Behold the Lamb of God who's coming to take away the sins of the world." Right? Jesus literally defined us as his loved children and said he would pay the price for our death. He would pay the consequences for our sin. He would defeat our enemies. And on the cross, 2,000 years ago, he had a lot of experiences. One, he was stripped naked and beaten, completely naked, hanging and exposed for everyone to see. And he was in deep pain and deeply humiliated. And while he was doing those things, what the Bible says is that he became the propitiation of our sins, meaning he absorbed all of our sin. Maybe you don't believe that. That is a hard and complex thing to think. But not like a representative of our sin. He actually took our sin. And so all of the bad things that made us enemies of God were taken from us and placed on Jesus. And on these moments on the cross, he literally became the enemy of his own Father. He became the enemy of God. And so he is feeling this pain and paying the price for this pain, and he says something, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So that enemy of abandonment, he is really feeling and experiencing. He's literally staring it down and feeling all that pain and sorrow. And he paid that price. So he dealt with the humiliation. He dealt with being misrepresented. He dealt with pain. And then ultimately, he dealt with death. And he dies. He stares death down, and that's the one that gets really confusing 2,000 years ago, because when that happens, he dies. And they put him in a tomb. I mean, he's dead. He has no pulse. There is a time of death announced for Jesus. And what's crazy is people celebrated it. Just such a complex deal. And as he is about to die and people are celebrating this, he's literally saying, God, my Father, would you forgive them? They don't know what they're doing. They're so clueless. Would you please forgive them? And then he dies and gets put in a tomb. And then on the third day, that Sunday, while we celebrate on Sundays now, he defeated that enemy too. Death. So the battle is defining your enemy and defeating it. The great news of the resurrection is he stares down every enemy we have, absorbs them all, and defeats them. And then he says that same power that he had to defeat all those enemies is now going to engage and enter our lives and give us the same power to defeat those same enemies. That's abandonment, that's fear, that's sadness, that's shame, that's humiliation, and that's death. That's what he offers us, and the resurrection is proof of that. So what Christians do on this Sunday is they stand up and declare death has no hold on us, because Jesus faced it and defeated it. And for the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40, 50, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I'm going to do my best to try to convince you, really, that the resurrection matters because it changes everything for us. So this is going to be a persuasive speech. I want you to know, if you're a Christian, I hope this firms things up and really helps you understand what takes place here and what God's up to in this resurrection. If you're not a Christian, I just want to be really, really candid with you here. I would love for you to consider these things. Love for you to consider them, right? Like, imagine it this way. Tim Keller says this. Imagine that you got a letter in the mail that looked real, like it looked certified and official. You had to sign for it, and it said that you had some long lost relative out there who died and left you, I don't know, $500,000, right? You don't believe it when you see those silly emails from Nigeria or whatever it is, but this is a certified letter, right? A certified letter that you get in the mail that says you're a long-lost relative, you don't know the relative, but this, like, it looks really legit and official. I mean, it'd be a great April Fool's thing to do to people, but it looks really, really legitimate. Now, when you see that, you don't go, oh my gosh, I'm a millionaire, right? Or half a millionaire. You don't go spend it. You don't go buy a new house. You don't do those things yet. But you at least decide to start investigating it, right? I mean, you're going to investigate it with a little bit of trepidation, with caution, because you don't want to get too excited about it. But you'd at least investigate it, right? Well, this news, if it's true, if it's really true that same power that defeats death and defeats all enemies and is now available to us for now and for all eternity, that's a lot better than $500,000. And so would you at least investigate it? Now, here's going to be my approach, okay? This is going to sound really messed up, but again, I don't want to manipulate you, so I just want to put this out there. I'm imagining that you are a terrorist, okay? Or maybe not a terrorist, that's too, maybe I don't know, a hostage person. Like you have a gun and you're in a bank, or you're in a bank, that sounds good. And you've held the whole bank up. That's what I imagine you, okay? Okay? So you have all these hostages, and you are holding lots of people hostage, and you're in there, and I'm out here, and I'm on the phone, and I'm trying to be the negotiator to talk you down. You got the movies, you understand what that's like, right? So what I need you to understand, in this scenario, you're the bad guy, I'm the good guy, okay? And you are both, this is where it gets complicated. You ready for this? I'm going to blow your minds, and there's going to be lots of fun. Didn't know you were going to get to play some role-playing at church today. You are both the hostage taker and the hostage, okay? So you're both the person who is held hostage, and you're the person holding people hostage. That's all you, right? And so I want you to imagine the picture. What that means is, in your world right now, you have the gun, you think you have the power, and you think you have all the authority. You are in control of the room, or it certainly feels like it, because everybody, including yourself, is doing what you say to do, right? So I want you to imagine that's who you are in this, right? Now, what you don't know is there are windows and the blinds aren't shut. That's your first mistake. You should have shut the blinds, but you didn't. They're open, and all around you are snipers, right? And there are little red dots all over you, but you don't know that. You don't know that. You think you're in control. And so I'm going to, over the next 20 minutes, go, hey, this is going to end really badly for you. This is going to end badly. You don't think it is. You think you're in control. You think you have all the power. You think you have all the authority. But I want you to hear me. This is going to end badly for you if you continue to try to assert your own control and manage and handle all the things thinking you are the most powerful and the most authoritative one in the room. This will end badly for you. And your best option, although you don't see it, although you don't know it, although you can't quite figure this out, it doesn't make sense, you don't have a category for it, it's not explainable to you yet, your best option is to put the gun down, raise your hands in surrender, and walk out of the room, right? Now, yes, of course, it's going to change some things about your life. There's going to be some things you're going to have to work through as a result, but your best option, the very best thing for you would be to sit down, the control, hold up your hands and surrender, and walk out, right? Because here's the reality. That control that you think you have is a complete illusion. It's all in here, and it is, if you even were to stop long enough to think about it, you would even come to the same conclusion that you're not near as in control as you'd like to think that you are. So that's literally my objective here. And again, hear me, I know you're going, see, he's going to try to use that emotion and that. I want this to be very unemotional, okay? I want you to know what's going on here. I'm trying to take the emotion out of it as the negotiator and go, I want you to know what I'm trying to do. But now what we're going to do is we're just going to read a passage, and I'm just going to point out some reasons why it makes sense for you to walk away from disbelief and walk into a place of belief, okay? And so that's the goal. So where I'm going to be is in John chapter 20. Really neat book of the Bible. So if you're not familiar with the Bible, it's split up Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament talks about how broken we are and the ramifications of that brokenness. You see all sorts of horrific things happen in the Old Testament as a result of our sin and as a result of us trying to be in control. When I say this will end badly for you, your best option is to sit the gun down. What you see is an Old Testament of people go, nope, we'll do it our own way. And it over and over again ended really badly for a lot of people. But every time it would end badly, God would say, but there'll be a day where all this will get resolved. There'll be a day when there'll be a Messiah who will come and he'll save the day. And they're all that, the whole Old Testament is pointing to the day where all that's going to get fixed, reconciled with Jesus. And so the New Testament begins with the story of Jesus. And so the first 4 books of the New Testament are called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And those are gospel accounts or biographies of Jesus' life. One of the biographies that we're going to be reading about today is written by a guy named John. Now, John is Jesus' buddy. He's the youngest of Jesus' first 12 followers. And so he was loved well by Jesus. In fact, he was so loved by Jesus. When Jesus is about to die on the cross, he looks out at his mother and he says to John, will you take care of her? I mean, he loves Jesus, and Jesus loves him. And so John writes this biography from an eyewitness account. He was with Jesus about Jesus' life. Now, we would say, not only did John do it, it was empowered and inspired by the Holy Spirit and God. So God uses John to tell this story so that we'd have it 2,000 years later. And John actually tells us the thesis of his writing, the whole reason he writes this whole book. One reason, he says, I write these things so that you may believe. So John wants you to believe. I want you to believe. That's our goal with this. And so we're going to start with John chapter 20. Now, when we start in John chapter 20, what has just happened is Jesus has died, and he died on a Friday night, and at sunset, that began the Sabbath. So as a result of the Sabbath, nothing could be done in Jewish culture. So everything shut down. All the stores shut down. They had to rush to get Jesus' body in a tomb. And so what's going to happen is a couple days later, they're going to come and they're going to want to take care of Jesus' body properly. And so these people are going to show up at the tomb, and they're going to have a surprise that doesn't fit any category that they understand. So that's their experience. Now, we have a much different perspective of this because we know the rest of the story. But in the first century, these guys think it's over. Their very best friend was just murdered. They had put all their hope in him. They had left their jobs for him. He was going to save them from the oppression that they were currently experiencing, and that doesn't happen. In fact, they feel more oppression as a result of what happened, and they are in a horrific spot. Now, just to be very candid with you, think this is spiritual, I'm not sure, but every year, without fail, this Holy Week, the week leading up to it, is probably the worst week in terms of my thought life and my anxiety. So if you don't know, I struggle deeply with anxiety, have actually used medications at times to deal with the chemical imbalance of that. And so when that anxiety is unkept, those thoughts, I mean, my biggest dream in life is for my brain to slow down, right? It just, stuff's always flying there. And you're going, you talk so fast. I'm going, I'm talking really slow compared to all these thoughts in my head. Like, I am talking really slow. If you, like, you're getting like 1/20th of what's going on up here, right? And so if it is unmanaged for me, which is the reason I think a counseling center is so important and why that has opened, newlondoncounselingcenter.com. You can go there. We have 5 licensed therapists who would be happy to chat with you, meet with you, work through life's problems the same way I do each week with people. But when that is uncapped, right, it leads to a real tiredness for me. And that tiredness, if it's not dealt with, turns into paranoia. Right? Like, I have all sorts of worries that I'm going to wreck my family, that I'm going to wreck my kids, that I'm going to destroy the church. Like, just these. I mean, they're irrational fears that if I don't really, really deal with them and do the hard work of kind of defining these things as not true and putting truth back into my head, it gets out of control to the point where it would dip me into some depression. And so that's just kind of my weird roller coaster. And without fail, this week leading up to the resurrection is always a really bad one. And by about Thursday, it gets really bad. And frankly, I'm still I think I'm coming out of it, but just been really, really overwhelming. And I think it has something to do with just this picture of, for these disciples, and God became absent, just completely absent. And there are times, specifically this week, where God has felt that way to me, right? And so I completely understand these guys going, all the world is just, everything they thought was true and experienced, now all of a sudden doesn't seem true and doesn't seem real, and they are devastated. Like, this is the worst news they could possibly imagine. So they are devastated. So when they show up at this tomb, they're expecting to see their dead friend and to be able to mourn and grieve the loss of him one more time, right? That's the only expectation they have. But in John chapter 20, they're going to come to this unexplainable category that they've never had, and yet they're going to be two things. It's unexplainable, and yet what's going on is undeniable. And those things are going to collide, and they're going to have a hard time reconciling it. And so we get to reconcile this together. So here goes. John chapter 20. I'm going to read a couple verses, talk about them. Here goes. Early on the first day of the week, that's Sunday, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So Mary goes, sees that there's a big open hole from the tomb. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple. Now watch this. This is so funny. This other disciple is the writer of this this biography. So this is John, and he's, I think, trying to be humble, but he's not doing a very good job with humility. Because he goes, the other disciple, so he's talking about himself in third person, which is never really a good way to be humble, ever, right? The other disciple, I love this, the one Jesus loved. So he's writing this, and like when these disciples are reading this, they're like, really, John, you had to say that? One of the reasons I'd say you should read your Bible, and if it was a make-believe story, a lot of the stuff would be left out. But John tells us he's a disciple whom Jesus loved. It gets better in a second, so stay with me. And they had said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. They have lost Jesus. This guy who was dead is now disappeared. They have lost Jesus. So their world was really bad, and they just wanted to mourn and grieve one more time, which is really important for any kind of healing. You got to grieve. They need to do that, and they cannot find the body. They have lost Jesus. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. So Mary comes back, tells them, now watch this. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. If you know anything about Peter in the Bible, he is so arrogant and obnoxious. And I love him. I identify so much with him. He has ready, shoot, aim. Now, just a couple of days earlier when Jesus was getting arrested, Peter's like, I'll save you. And he pulls out a sword and cuts off a man's ear. And Jesus, in the moment, stops and says, no, thank you, Peter. And picks up the ear and puts it back on the guy. Just all sorts of craziness, right? So he's just loud and boisterous and arrogant. Just the exact opposite of me, right? And so Peter is running, and John makes sure to get it in the scriptures for all eternity that he outran Peter. This is the Easter story. He's like, this is a big one. Everybody's going to want to read about this. It's really important that everybody knows that I'm faster than Peter. You see this? Even 2,000 years ago, men are still struggling with their identity of, outpace, outbeat. So it's like the YMCA records. John's wanting to make sure his stays at the top, right? So he reached the tomb first. Literally it says, nana, nana, boo, boo, Peter, right? So watch this. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. So what you're going to see here in verse 5, verse 6, and verse 7, we're going to see the word look or saw show up, or see, right? They're going to show up in each of these passages. But what's interesting is in the original language, this was written in Koine Greek. That would have been the language of that was written in the time because of the Roman Greco influence for the Jews. This word see or saw or looked is 3 different words. So this first one is the Greek word blepe, and it literally just means he saw, right? Like he saw something in front of his eyes, he saw, like just a very literal sense. It says that John looked at the strips of linen there but did not go in. So he saw it, he was a little creeped out, and he's not going in, right? You know what he's talking about. If you've ever encountered a cave or gone into some dark place and you're going out, you go first, right? So fast John doesn't want to go in first. But Peter, remember, ready, shoot, aim, he's willing to go in. And so then Simon Peter came along behind him because he was slow, but he went straight into the tomb because he doesn't always think. He, watch this, saw the strips of linen lying there. Now this is interesting because this is a different word than John sees real quickly, just observes. This word saw is, I can't even pronounce it in Greek, but it's the same word. It's like theoreo. It's the same word we get for theory. So when you hear about Christians, you go, see, I don't want to be one of those because you just tell me you have to suspend all facts and all belief and just believe nonsense, right? Which is just the exact opposite of what these disciples and Christians throughout history have done. They have really legitimate reasons to believe what they believe. So we are never asking anyone to just suspend all the facts to now go, okay, I believe in this magic fairy tale God. We're actually going, no. You should investigate all the facts because all truth belongs to God. And when you find all those facts and put them together, you will find God in them, right? I don't know who says it, maybe, but an unknown person says theology is the crown jewel of all academics. Meaning, you can search through every single academic field and you will come to a place of unknownness. Like, take science as far back as you can. Take math as far back as you can. Take music. Where does it come from? Who created the notes? Why is there only so many notes, right? Take all the colors in the universe. Why are there just that many colors? Why are there not more, right? And so when you investigate any of these things, history, of course, go all the way back to the beginning, where you'll get is a place where you will find God because he's the only thing that solves and provides a solution and an answer for everything else that's unexplainable. So what this says here is now Peter looks into the tomb and he starts putting together some theories. This is him considering all sorts of stuff. So this word here, it's really easy for us to glance over. It's not Peter just looking going, okay. He's actually coming up with some theories about what's going on. And he's telling us the evidence he sees. Now watch this. So he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, You see that again? Here it is, John again, wanting to make sure you know he got there first. Okay, John, we got it. Finally, the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went and saw and believed. So what Peter does here is, John tells us that Peter looked in and he starts to put together a theory. And I don't know, I don't see this in scriptures, but I would imagine there's some things going through his head. The first one is, did someone steal his body? Right? That would make the most sense. Someone had to steal his body. Okay, if they're bad guys and they're stealing his body, why would they leave his clothes? For a couple reasons. One, that takes more time, and these guys would have been in a hurry, right? Because they want to grab the body and get out of there, so you don't strip them down naked. Second of all, that cloth, the linen cloth, and the anointment that was all over that cloth was worth a lot of money. So if these are thieves, they're going to steal the body with the clothes on it and then sell the oils and sell the clothes later, right? So he's going, okay, we're probably getting a bad guy. It's not some kind of thief just trying to pretend that none of this happened. And they go, well, what if it's one of our people? What if one of us who really want to take care of Jesus, they just went in to get his body? Right? Just doesn't even consider all the things like how in the world was the tomb rolled open, all that kind of stuff. None of that's considered in this moment. Maybe he thought it, but just here with the facts we have. But even if it were one of the people who loved Jesus and cared for him, the last thing you would do is shame Jesus by stripping him naked. Right? You wouldn't dishonor his body by taking all of his clothes off of him and then folding them out nicely and putting them there. So Peter is now considering all the facts and trying to come up with some conclusions. Now what it says here is the faster of the two guys, he saw it, and it just says, and he believed. Now we don't know exactly what he believes here. We don't know if that means he believes in the resurrected body. We don't think that's the case as a result of the next verse, because watch what it says. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. So what we know here is they have come up with something that's unexplainable. They cannot explain what happened to Jesus' body. That is true and foundational. But they also have come up with something that's undeniable. His body is not there. Right? There's unexplainable. We can't explain why these clothes are here and Jesus is not. But it's undeniable. Jesus is no longer here. Those two things now are at war with each other. And what you'll see and what you'll discover is faith is what you deal with when the unexplainable collides with the undeniable, right? And so they're going, Jesus is not here. We can't explain it, which just means we don't have a category for it. And I would just offer, there's a lot in our world we don't have a category for it, but that does not make it less true. So a couple of things there that I want you to see, some really good evidence of why I think you should believe this is a true story. And then that'll be nice, some quick evidence, and then some reasons why it should really matter for you. You ready? So here goes, verse 11. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. Okay, so Mary's back in the picture. This is Mary Magdalene. This is one of Jesus' friends who he loved. She loved him. We find her first in the Gospel of Luke. I think it's chapter 8, first couple of verses, where we find out that she's demon-possessed. Now, I don't know what you know about demon possession. I don't even know if you agree with it or believe in it or think it's hocus pocus. But throughout scriptures and throughout the history of the world, there's been onslaughts of this, where this is discussed. And what we know, kind of categorically, is folks who dealt with this were at least mentally ill, right? And they were outcasts. We see in scriptures there's a Gerasene demoniac where we find a guy that's filled with demons, and he's literally chained up in a graveyard all by himself. So we know that would have made Mary an outcast and not living her best life, for sure. She's got demons in her head, right? She's got all these lies spinning in her head. And Jesus comes and he frees her from that. And so she loves him for that. So this is the Mary. She's there, and she is sobbing because, again, she just lost her best friend, and she can't even grieve it now. And she went over to look to the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. So she shows up, and they asked her a question. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" That's not an offensive term. We use woman offensively. This is a very gracious, sincere, gentle term. Woman, why are you crying? And she says, we don't know who they are. They have taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they've put him. And then she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener. It's so funny. I guess she thought, someone's going to be in there pruning that tomb. Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So he's establishing that this has made his God her God, and his Father her Father. Very profound, right? And tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord, and she told them that he had said these things to her. Okay, so now this is where the news gets spread. 2,000 years later, we get this news, but we can now find patient zero, right? This is the first person to ever find out in the history of the world that there is a resurrected God. This is it. It starts with this woman, and that actually leads to a pretty important point. Some of you have heard this, considered it. But history hasn't been kind to women, right? Typically those who are the strongest have the most power, and with the most power comes the most privilege. And so men have leveraged their power and their privilege at the expense of people with less power and privilege, right? So throughout history, men have mistreated women, been misogynistic to women, and what's really interesting is people view the church as a place where that happens. But what's really interesting, 2,000 years ago, women were not respected in any way. They were a means to an end, and that was childbearing. Sounds horrible to say, but in first century Greek, Roman world, this isn't Christian world, but in that world, women weren't even considered truthful. They could not testify in a court. So if a woman witnessed a murder, then went to court and said, that's the man, I saw it happened at 2:30, and this was the weapon he used, they would go, can you find a man who actually saw it too? Because if not, this means nothing. I mean, just horrific, right? So, imagine this. Jesus has this brand new news that's going to spread throughout the world, and he's going to want every single man, woman, and child to know that he is a resurrected king. And you see what he does here? He decides to start with a woman. If this is a made-up story, right? If you're taking first century dudes writing a story about how there's a made-up God who came back to life, like some kind of Aesop fable or some kind of mythology, this would not start with some woman. It would be a really poor approach because people would go, no, you can't believe a woman. In fact, in the 2nd century, the biggest argument that countered the idea of the resurrection was written by a guy named Celsus, okay? And here's what he said. And his argument is, you can't trust this because it came out of a woman's mouth. And this is what he said, really offensive. He said this, how can anyone expect rational men to listen to the testimony of a hysterical female? Who wants to hit him in the mouth? Right? So, if this is the case, like if that's the idea that in the 1st century no one would believe a woman, why would a made-up story start with a woman? It wouldn't have. Which leads us to go, maybe this isn't a made-up story. Maybe this is actually how it happened, and it doesn't fit in the category that we can explain, but it is undeniable. And so you got that pretty neat that he starts with a woman, but there's actually another one. There's lots of them, but these are only two the text brings up, so that's the only thing I'll talk about today. Is that you see with Peter and John that they had needed some evidence to believe. We see that they get the evidence and they believe. In fact, history captures both of them, not just in the scriptures, but throughout human history as suffering. Horrific lives. Peter and his wife actually are crucified, martyred for their belief. John is exiled to an island. That's how we get these words. Because of this belief. In fact, hundreds of thousands of people in the 1st century create this uprising that start believing in this man Jesus as Savior to the point of death. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are murdered for this belief in the 1st century. And this isn't the first time. I mean, people throughout history, particularly in that last century before Jesus, 1st century after Jesus, that there'd be what we'd call messianic pretenders. There'd be people who'd show up and say, you could trust me, I'm God. Drink my Kool-Aid, right? Still happens. But in all those evidence, I mean, you think about even now, when you think about the Hale-Bopp, Halley's Comet thing, or the drink the Kool-Aid, David Koresh stuff. You know how those movements stop? The ones who claim they are God died. And people go, can't follow him anymore, right? Because there's no one to follow. But in the 1st century, that doesn't happen. In fact, in the 1st century, thousands of more people start to follow as a result of the resurrection. So we either have to go, either the resurrection's true, or something as big and significant as the resurrection must have happened in the 1st century, because why would all these people give their lives for it? So all these people start believing in this, and so there's just some, right here, it starts with a woman, which is awesome, by the way, which points to the good news of the gospel is for all people, and Christianity is not misogynistic. It actually defines value as in the image of God and affirms women in leadership and affirms women for the sake of the gospel, right? And so you see all that, and then you see all these people start chasing after this. You go, either Either something had to happen or the resurrection had to happen, and it makes more sense and more explainable based on what we see in history that the resurrection happened than anything else happened, right? But again, that's just some evidence. That doesn't really change anything. But what I do want to point out as we wrap this thing up is there is something that really does change this. And it actually has to do with how Jesus meets people. You see, I'd love for you to go, God, I surrender, I trust you, but the reality is I can't convince you of anything. Neither can your spouse, neither can your parents or grandparents or your children. Like, this is not some way I grab a whiteboard and I write it out and you go, aha, now I believe. What we see here is that's not how belief starts. What's really so profound and in many ways makes me feel helpless, in other ways makes me feel so relieved, that all this always originates with Jesus. You see, they went looking for a dead guy, but Jesus came and found them as a living Savior. Jesus actually initiates this. She's crying and she's sobbing. And it literally says that Jesus reached out. Let me just read it to you again so you can see this. Now, Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She's sad. She's looking for a category that she understands. Dead guy, right? As she wept, she bent over to look in the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? They have taken away my Lord," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener. She said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." So she's looking for a category that makes sense to her. A dead guy. But watch what happens. She can't find him. She's looking for him. He's not there. But watch what Jesus does. Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him and cried out in the Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. You see this? She didn't find it. She didn't uncover it. She didn't discover it. He made himself known. He called her by name. Like, he reached out and he called her by name. This is so important because we are all searching for some way to find our identity and find our value, right? All of us, every one of us, doesn't matter what your worldview is, you are looking and searching for your identity. And what the narrative of our world tells you now is figure out deep in your heart who you are and what you feel and then force that on everybody else. You stand up boldly with your bullhorn and you tell everybody who you are, and either they can follow you, they can like you for who you are, or they can get out of your way, right? Just with all the defiance of the world, just be so bold about who you are. That's the narrative. Be you, celebrate you. And yet all you're seeing is a bunch of people isolated and hurt and broken. And this very narrative that we're telling people they should do to make them feel so alive isn't actually making anyone feel alive. Because you see what we can discover in psychology would prove this is where you find your identity isn't in declaring who you are and affirming it out and declaring it. You know how you find your identity and value? It's really simple. When someone you adore adores you back. When someone you adores you back. That's why we struggle so much with our issues with our mom or our dad or our grandparents or our ex. Someone you adored didn't adore you back, and it just brought pain and sorrow. Our identity is found when someone you adore just adores you back. Mary adored Jesus. And in this moment, he doesn't show up like in Soldier Field declaring his greatness. He whispers in the quiet to her, "Mary, I adore you back." But he's not just a man now. He's the God of the universe, and he's just proven it. Someone she adores him back. The God of the universe adores you. The creator of the universe adores you. That's where identity is found. When someone you adore adores you back. But what is even more amazing about that, that's mercy and really great, but there's also some grace. There's this gift that happens. The reality is, we needed Mary to become who she was supposed to be. 2,000 years later, we are declaring the truth that first came out of her mouth. We needed Mary to become who she was always meant to be. And that's the greatest news of the gospel, is that God affirms the value that he adores you and you can adore him back. Like, he sees that and he affirms that. And demon-possessed social outcasts became in the middle of the greatest story. And 2,000 years later, we're still declaring that. Like, God used this woman and we needed her to use him. Or we needed him to use her, right? And so we see that in this moment, right? You see that. We needed Mary to be who God had always wanted her to be. And that's the story of the gospel, is that God called you by name and says, "I don't care what your story was. I'm now rewriting your story, and you're in the middle of my story." And that's what he welcomes us into. And then we get to see. So there's this interesting thing. Tim Keller talks about, you might know her, Annie Dillard. She's a Pulitzer writer, and she wrote this, and she said this: I've been my whole life a Baal, but I didn't know it until I was lifted up and wrung. I'd been my whole life a Baal, but I just didn't know it until I was lifted up and wrung. You see, Mary always had a really good story. Mary is always going to do something. She was made in the image of God to go and do something incredible. She just had no clue until God lifted her up and rang her. So Jesus said, don't hold on to me, for I am not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to your God, or to my God and your God. She's going, hey, there's going to be a day where all this is reconciled, but today is not the day. We will be in heaven, and I will be your God, and he'll be your Father, and I will be there with you, and everything will be perfect. But that's not today. And then he gave her a directive, and he says this: Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. So there's two responses. One is to believe it, soak it in it. The other is to share it. So as Jesus is on the cross, he makes a couple of statements, and the band's will come up and lead us in this last song as we wrap it up. One of the things he says is, Father, forgive them, they know not what they're doing. In other words, he looks at our world and goes, God, they're trying to find their identity and value in so many things they can't find it in. So would you forgive them? And then, the other thing he says, so profound, he literally declares, he surveys the world, he surveys all the punishment, all the things that he had just conquered, and he had one more thing to conquer, which was death. He absorbed the pain and all that stuff of all of our behavior, and he makes this statement, and he goes, it is finished. It's paid in full, meaning every sin in the world, past, present, future, all the ways that people walked away from me, all that stuff gets resolved in me today. In other words, we should no longer beat ourselves up for what Jesus already beat himself up over. And so he makes this news on the cross and he goes, it is finished. And it's finished, meaning you are made whole and perfectly right before God if you believe that. So for some of you, maybe it's just pausing for a second and hearing Jesus call your name. For others of you, maybe it's just celebration of the resurrection story and it being finished. But regardless of what it is, would you stand with me as we sing this song together?